Eric Brewer, third time on the show, man. There's a reason for that. You know your stuff. So thank you for coming back on.
Thanks for having me. I think this is the first time I've ever been on a show 3 times.
Well, it's funny that you say that because the first time you came on the show, I was in my old office down the street from here, and you were really not on social media that much. You probably didn't do too many interviews. And now you're everywhere, like bigger pockets. You're going to be on CNN before you know it. And Fox, you're going to be all over the place, man.
Yeah. I don't know. It'd be either one of those. I might hold off just a little bit longer, but
yeah.
No, it's pretty cool. It's been a cool development. The first time we talked, might've been the first podcast I'd ever been on, to be honest with you, because I think you and I got connected through John Martinez and had geeked out on some sales stuff together, and you invited to come over and talk, and I didn't have much to talk about, but somehow we made it an interesting 45 minutes or so. But it's pretty cool to be back for a third time. I appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
My pleasure, man. Well, you only did like 3,500 houses at the time. So, you didn't have that much experience. I don't know if you're qualified, but now I think you're a little bit more qualified. Yeah. A couple houses here and there in Pennsylvania. Yeah. I always call you the PA king, man. All my buddies, I'm like, oh, you're in PA? You know Eric Brewer? He's like the king of PA. And they're like, oh, I know Brewer. I'm like, you probably do.
Yeah.
That's funny. Well, let's get into it. So you mentioned the sales word here, and this is something that I know you like to talk about. I like to talk about. A lot of people, they have challenges with sales. They don't understand it. They don't look at it in a systemized, manner. So let's just kind of cover, like, what are your, like, if we're going to really look at sales from a high level today and make this a really tactical podcast, if you're training someone, I know you're not involved in your business as much anymore, but if you're going to teach sales training, like, what are the pillars that you like to teach someone so they can take it and they can go out and execute it? Because a lot of people, they really have an issue with the sales aspect with sellers.
So I think there's a couple like fundamentals, right? Like, I think if you look at the basics of sales, most people probably have half of it right. And the other half, could make or break whether or not they get a deal. So for me, some of the, without getting into the entire process, I think if I were to look at what most people might be doing now that I think they should do differently, that would drastically impact the outcome or the results that they get. Over the phone, I think far too many people disqualify motivated sellers. We've actually gotten so good at disqualifying unmotivated sellers. We now can disqualify a motivated seller. That's how good we've gotten, right? We can actually talk somebody out of selling their house. I think what happens so often in the beginning of a phone call, if it's not done tactfully, is people are asking high impact questions when they only have a low impact relationship. Things like, are you looking to sell in the next 90 days? If you've been on the phone for 10 to 12 minutes, that's a very high impact question. It changes a lot of what happens in that seller's life, but you have a low impact relationship. What does that mean? You might not get the truth, or they're answering a different question than the one that you're asking. I think a lot of times when we ask people if they're ready to sell, the answer to that question that they're answering in their mind is, am I ready to move? Selling and moving are two different things. You and I can write a contract today. You might not need to move out for 30 days. We offer a sell and stay program here where people can stay for up to a year in their house after I've bought it. We structure those deals differently. We often sell them to buy and hold people. We pack it with rents, right? Where if I think the rent is $1,000 a month, I'll make it $1,500 a month. That's $18,000 in a year. I'll pack the deal 18 grand and say, Greg, you want to buy this house for $118,000? My net is 100, and he's going 118. I go, yeah, there's $1,500 a month rent already in escrow for you when you go to settlement. Wow, that house only rents for $1,000. You're going to give me 1,500? Sign here, press hard. It's got to go through both copies, right? So I think what a lot of people do is they overqualify and they say, are you looking to sell in the next 90 days? Some people won't even attend or make an offer to someone that doesn't say yes to that. And we also ask for price a lot of times on the front end. Again, high impact question. What's the least amount you'll take for your house is a high impact question. You have low impact relationships. You're a stranger that called them or texted them or sent them a 40-cent piece of mail. They've only known you for about 12 minutes. They're not going to give up the goods. Here's the only reason I ask about price on the initial call, because they expect it. They expect there to be some type of, I generally don't care, right? You know what our criteria is for going to an appointment? If their asking price is less than 200% of the Zestimate, we're still going to go to the appointment. It doesn't matter. Like, you're asking, what do you want for your house? That's the way that people, what they want and what they'll take are two different things. And I can't get to what they'll take in 12 minutes. I need to go through a real sales process, right? And I don't want to do that necessarily on the first call, or like in our model, we have a lead manager who schedules appointments and acquisitions that attends. I don't want to try and force a lead manager to be a salesperson that's a great negotiator. I just want them to build a lot of trust. I think too many people seek rapport. Rapport is surface level. It's gotten a bad rap. We mislabel it. We want to actually seek trust in our sales process, because I think rapport is BS.
Dude, that's so good, because a lot of people have a problem building rapport or trust, and they don't understand how to actually do it. And it's from asking good questions and listening, not talking about the fact that you both like the Philadelphia Eagles. That is nothing.
Exactly. Like, right. Because that may be good while you're walking through the house, but when you sit down and you price anchor him at 40 cents on the dollar, he could give two, you know what's, if you like the Eagles or the Redskins or you like the Cowboys, and you hit him at 40% on the dollar, he might swing on you. But I learned this from a Navy SEAL I took a lot of coaching for, and he said the two best ways to build real trust is through vulnerability and transparency. And if you think about that, in most people's sales process, there's the absence of any of that. We're not transparent. We dodge in the shadows, and we don't give them a price and say, hey, call me for an offer. And they go, how much you're offering? And go, well, you're supposed to give me the price first. When I go to a car lot, they don't ask me, it's on the sticker. Right? Like it's so backwards. And all it does is encourage sales resistance. And then we get mad when people give us resistance, but it's their response that most people have built up, almost like an immunity to salespeople that they build up over the course of time, and buying cars, buying houses, buying anything of significant money. And then vulnerability, we always seem like we got to be so confident. Right? We have to be an expert when it comes to the numbers. I'll tell people like, hey, I apologize. When it comes to the numbers, I'm not really all that great at it. Frankly, I'll tell people, Greg, this is the toughest part about my job. I hate negotiating. I hate it. It's the worst part. I wish I could just come in here. You and I become buddies. We don't even talk about price. You write it down on a piece of paper. I fold it up, and we go to settlement 30 days from now, and I'll pay you when I get there. Unfortunately, it's not how it works. But I just want to let you know, if I seem a little uncomfortable or nervous when we're talking about money, it's because I really want to help you. But I also realize that money means a lot to both of us, and sometimes those two don't just come together. So just will you forgive me in advance if I just seem a little uneasy when we get into price? And I'll go, oh, dude, don't worry about it, man. I was like, well, I just don't want to make you an offer that would upset you. And you know what they're going to say? Dude, it's no big deal. I'm not going to get upset.
Now you have permission to make a low offer.
You promise, Bill? Right? So I always say you have to build enough trust that you can make an insulting offer at their kitchen table and not get punched in the face.
I love that. It's so true, because a lot of investors will make the offer like, oh, I'll offer you $250 for your house. And they're just like, what? $250? It's worth $450. But if you anchor them in advance, you're like, Eric, you're going to hate the offer. I feel a little uncomfortable making it. You promise you won't get pissed? When they say, no, it's okay, I get it, they start justifying before you even open your mouth. I know you got to make a profit. I know you're not offering market value. That's why a realtor isn't in here. And when they make you the offer, their expectations are now at level 2 versus level 6. And you can start that negotiation, right? And that's where a lot of salespeople, they get hit in the face. They get thrown out of the house. By the way, on a side note, did you get punched in the face at an appointment one time? I heard that.
Did. By the way, I won the fight though. I got hit first. I didn't get hit last.
Can you just tell the people what happened? This is insane.
Yeah. So this was, oh my goodness, 10 years ago, I bet. And 10 years ago, we had a very small buy box. I bought stuff that was like $200,000 or less.
Yeah.
I was primarily, fix and flipper, didn't do much wholesale. So if a deal didn't fit in this nice little box, our acquisitions people didn't feel comfortable moving forward. Well, this particular deal, there was a lot of really good circumstances. Guy was from out of town. He actually drove, now that I think about it, it was super creepy, but he drove here to Pennsylvania from Georgia, which he lived, in a motorhome. Stayed in the motorhome, and the house he was selling was on a golf course community, and a tenant had just moved out. And I think our fix and flip numbers were like 150, but my acquisitions agent's like, dude, the guy wants 180. I think it's worth like 229 as is. And he wouldn't novate access. He was just hard pressed to get. He wanted to close in 7 days. And my guy's like, Eric, like, you have to authorize us to pay 180. And if anybody can get a discount from him, I asked him 12 times. He said, no. but if you can get a discount, it'll work. And if we're going to pay 180, you have to authorize it because it's your money. So at the time, it was very close to the location where I would take my son for football practice, and I coached. So I was like, yeah, it said the guy wants to meet at 6:00. I'll drive my son off at football practice at 5:45. Normally there's plenty of kids there. I'll be good. I'll let the other coaches know that I'll be back in an hour or so. So I get there at 5:45. Of course, of all things, no coaches anywhere in sight. I'm the only guy there. So I text my acquisitions agent because for some reason I didn't have the guy's contact information. I had an appointment and an address. And I said, hey, let so-and-so know I'll be a half hour late. I apologize. The coaches aren't here. I can't leave these 29-year-old kids
in a field by themselves.
Yeah, I can't do that. And he's like, oh, no problem. I'll let him know. He texted me back. He said, the guy said it's fine. So 5 minutes later, a coach rolls up and I'm like, oh, cool. I got to run. So I get there like 10 minutes late when Joe had texted him and said I'd be 30. And he said that was okay. And I parked at the bottom of the hill and he was standing up. There was like a sloped driveway and he was standing like just off the front porch out on the sidewalk. And he had like a very aggressive stance, which I didn't think much of, like whatever, the guy's got a lot going on. So I come up the driveway and I get 20 yards away. I'm like, hey, Bill, what's going on? Good to see you. Thinking I can get there. And he says something. I don't quite make it out. And he repeats it. And he goes something like, you better pay me $1,000 Did I lose your video?
Yeah, but I can still hear you.
He goes, you better pay me $1,000 for making me wait 15 minutes. And I said, well, maybe we can work something out if we get in the house. Bam! Like I was starting to tell the guy, like, yeah, no problem. $1,000, I'll work it into the deal. And halfway through deal, he punched me in my face.
Oh my God. Just you by yourself.
Just it's 6:15 in the afternoon in I don't know, August or September. So it was daylight out. And it like shocked me. And at first I was like, what is going on? And then like instincts kicked in and I like bear hugged the guy and drove him back into the front of the house. And I remember like he like slammed into the wall. And I remember seeing like his head like kind of bounce off. And I was like, oh my God, I just killed the guy.
Oh my
and he like fell to the ground, kind of slumped over. And I like standing over top. And I was like, what the F are you doing? And I just like went down and got my car, called the cops. The cops came, brought him out of the house, asked him about it. Of course, he denied the whole thing. I used to have the picture somewhere. I had like a little fat lip.
Oh my God.
But yeah. So I didn't have enough trust. That's why I got punched in the face.
Oh my goodness.
But
that's crazy.
Pretty
dude.
crazy.
I don't think I've ever heard that.
Why my video is this video going to cause problems? I got the spinning blue of death right now.
Yeah, you're good. We're good until it comes back on. It's no big deal. But that's
if the audio cuts out or something, I'll log back in. But
yeah, no, the audio's good. You're good. I can hear you loud and
so
clear.
Think about this. So here's the other thing I think people get wrong, and you just mentioned it right about price anchor. Fill this word in. Now you can't cheat because I think a little bit better than most people, but most people would fill this blank in how? He who speaks blank loses when it comes to negotiations.
First.
How do you feel about that?
It depends. I feel like it depends. I mean, if there's two schools of thoughts to it, I'll give you my honest opinion. So I've had this happen in two circumstances. So I'll give you one example of, actually, I can give you two examples. So I had a house, this was a while ago. I made over $100,000 on the thing rehabbing it. So not a normal deal for any circumstances. And the way that negotiation happened was I actually met the gentleman at the property. It was in a really, really good area back in the East Coast. And we did the whole sales process with him. And we got to the money piece. And I had a number in my head that I was going to be able to pay for this property, to take it down, fix and flip it. And before I shared my number, I was like, let me see what this guy wants. Because this house was filled with mold. It was a disaster. Mm-hmm. And I said, guy's name was Brian Maroney on 5 Orchard in Nanuet. I said, Brian, if I paid, and I had a lot of trust built with this guy. So this is not like a onesie twosie. Like I said, Brian, if I paid cash and bought the house as is, what would you want to get for the property? And I just shut my mouth. And he said a number that was lower than my first offer price. And I was like, in my head, I was like, that's odd. And then this is where it got interesting. I said, okay, I don't know if I can do that, Brian. If I was able to do that somehow, what would your next step be? So I didn't even make him an offer. I just shut up. And he said, I can't make a decision right now. So
Yeah.
I didn't make him an offer. I said, I'm gonna go back home and I'm gonna run my numbers and I'm gonna call you when you're ready to make a decision. And he said, I need to like a day or two to talk about this. So he doesn't know what my offer is. I know what his price is, and it was lower than my first off, like my anchor price. So when I called him back, I said, Brian, how did this conversation go with your girlfriend? And he said, I realized I was asking too little for the property. I said, understood. What number do you want? He gave me a higher number that was still super low. I don't have an offer from him yet. And I'm like, this is bizarre. And he knows the house needs a ton of work and he didn't want to do anything. He was at it from Jersey. And so when we got into the actual negotiation, the offer that I made him was basically a commitment on the number he already had in mind. And we ended up doing the deal, made a bunch of money. And that was, probably more of a unicorn deal, I would say. So in that case, him going first, I guess, helped. But normally what happens, Eric, is that if the seller gives you a price, okay, the person who speaks first loses, right? A lot of salespeople will hear a number from a seller and it might be higher than obviously what they want to pay. And they'll automatically throw that lead in the garbage and say, oh, they want 350. I can't pay 350. I can pay 250. This whole thing is not going to work out because the seller kind of started the price anchor. And now the investor is like mentally psyched out of the deal.
I call that a price kite.
A price kite.
Yes. They ran the kite up in the air, right? So like, here's what I would say, right? Like with a price anchor, right? Like an anchor is going to drive it down, an anchor is going to float it up. If my MAO, let's say, is $100,000, I'd probably want to start like a price anchor at 60.
That's if So if I was going to say, okay, that makes sense,
right? Now, if I speak first, I start at 60, right?
Yes.
If I ask the seller what they want and they tell me 150, how do you think that impacts the price anchor for most people?
Instead of going from 60, you're going to probably start at like 90.
Right. So if you, I know you're a big reader. I would bet the house on this. You ever read the book Persuasion by Dr. Cialdini?
The orange book.
So like Cialdini had a bunch of examples in there, right? Where he like compared a couple of different restaurants. Everything was virtually the same. And if they had a $5,000 bottle of wine on there, their average wine sales would be $1,000. If their most expensive wine bottle was only $3,000, their average wine sales was $200, right? And by the way, they never had the most expensive wine to sell. So it's not like it skewed the numbers. It was just and I do this all the time. I don't know about you. I know enough about wine to know what I like, but I'm far from a wine connoisseur. I literally look at the most expensive bottle and then I try and come down near the middle. And then I go up a little from the middle because like, hey, I'm supposed to be a little bit of a baller shot caller. I should be able to get more than like the middle of the road wine, right? Like what did Kanye say? Why do you think I work what do you think I work hard for? To push a RAV4, right? So I can't drive a RAV4. I can't bottle the middle of the pack wine. Same thing. So if you believe in that, by the way, science, behavioral science, they'll tell you who speaks first win in that methodology. And I would go back and say, and I think what you gave as a unicorn example is what most people grasp onto when they believe that he who speaks first loses, right? Now, the reality might have been if that guy was thinking, let's just say 50 and your anchor was going to be 70, you might have shocked him in to making a deal that day.
Yes.
And now you were lucky enough that you got the deal down the road. But when you leave, never a maybe, it's always a no, right? So when you left that day and you weren't able to make a deal with him, it was a no. And there's 1,000 things that yeah. So I mean, as long as you hold on to, but how many times does that happen? How many times is their asking price lower than your anchor? And the only thing I would say is if you get better at anchoring super low, that should never happen.
Exactly.
So the lesson there would be not that he spoke first and that worked out. It would be that your price anchor should have been lower than it was.
Yeah, should have been 100. Maybe that would have been on the house. Yeah. So
right. Yeah.
It's funny that you say that because I have found that the best way to even make a price anchor too, you don't necessarily even have to say to the owner, like, my offer is X. You could say like, hey, I saw a property down the road sell for 55 grand. Can you believe it? And now you set a price without having them associate that price with you. And you can have them basically process that. And sometimes they'll be like, Oh, well, I mean, I was hoping to get 60 for mine. Well, your low
Yeah.
anchor that you started with just got the seller to come down on a pretty low number to begin with. And that offer wasn't even from you. So by starting low and using the price anchor on your end as the buyer, you've already got the seller down without even telling the seller what your offer is. Like there's so many ways
Here's
to do that, you
here's
know?
a good one for anybody that does investing in areas where public auctions are popular. I like to do this one, and I'll say, Greg, as a investor, car dealer, I mean, lots of people go to auctions to get a good deal. You ever seen any? You go, yeah, I see auctions all the time, blah blah blah. And I go, so we go to a lot of auctions. We buy quite a bit of homes from there, and I've been in auctions before on homes, sort of like this, where like the high bid from, I don't know, 15, 20 people that came to the auction, high bid might be like, I don't know, I've seen it $55,000. If you were the seller of the property that day at that auction, what would you say if someone
Love
bid 55?
That's
Right
fine.
now, go, hey, I just want to let you know, by the way, because a lot of times that's a hidden deal killer, right? Like where people, particularly if I'm meeting with like an older person, the public auctions, a lot of times what we're competing against, because it's as is, they can sell it and close in 45 days. It's a very simple process. So I'm doing two things. I'm price anchoring, but I'm also letting them know that, hey, if you thought about taking it to an auction, you're going to get 55 grand, right? So that's I like what I call it like blame the third party. So if they get
Yes, a third
upset,
party offer.
yeah, they're blaming someone else, and I'll be like, yeah, I've seen other investors around here buying homes like this one for 60, 62. Does that kind of match up with what you were thinking? And they'll go, 62? That's crazy. I'll go, yeah, I don't know how they're getting away with buying
Yeah,
homes like that.
just
That's freaking crooks. But
bastards.
yeah, so I'm really big on, and that's because that's why most people don't want to start the price anchor, right? It makes them nervous because like if I know I can pay 100, if I offer 60, I could blow the deal. But if you really have trust, you could literally offer them zero, and they're not going to be upset, right?
100%.
So yeah, I think that your ability to be able to start with a price anchor has a lot to do with how the first 30 to 45 minutes of the call or the appointment goes. And they're going to give you permission to start off low. I mean, they're not saying like, go ahead and start low, but it's what they're saying, right? They're like, hey man, it's okay. I understand. You got to make a profit. No big deal. You're not going to hurt my feelings. So yeah, that's one of the things that I think most people have wrong. I'd always want to go first.
Well, especially too when you can indirectly make the offer, like you just mentioned, like, oh, I've seen houses sell for 60 grand. What are your thoughts on that? Now they're
Yeah,
not getting mad at you, they're getting mad at the fact, right? Oh
right.
my God, that's crazy. I know. I mean, I couldn't believe it either. I mean, shoot. Sounds like that's certainly something you wouldn't consider. And now you can, have them start, you know what I mean? Like that low. Because if you're willing to pay 100 and you start at 60 and they say no to 60 and you made the first offer, like now you can, like I always say, you could always go up. It's hard to come down. Like, especially too with sellers. It's like when you lock up a house and you're at one price and you realize you screwed up and you got to come down, they're going to feel a lot more pissed off because they thought they were selling for X. But if you start low and then you come up and you make them feel like you're really going to bat for them, it gets
Yeah.
the seller psychologically to commit to that deal because they feel like they're getting a good deal versus, you know what I mean? Like that's a huge part of the seller psychology.
Yeah, like that's the whole get, right? When you go to price anchor, you recalibrate what they think is expected, and when you cover the gap between 60 and let's say 100, which is your MAO, they feel like you've championed right on their behalf, and you've come up all of these price. And by the way, you need to make sure. I think the other thing a lot of people miss is they don't offer an explanation for the difference between where they started and where
Yes.
they're going to go. There
Yes.
has to be a give and take, or at some point they're going to go, so wait, what happened? Did you just try and rip me off a few minutes ago? Like at some point that's now, are they going to, people are going to, they never say that. Well, of
Yeah.
course they're not going to say it. Right. But that's what maybe let me think it over, or I need to check with my wife, or I'm just not quite sure. You got to remember, like we are skilled communicators. We study a lot about what to say, what not to say, the tone in which to say it, how fast to say it. Consumers don't do any of that. They're not skilled communicators. Right. So a lot of times they don't say anything, which makes it super hard for us to overcome objections, or they say one thing and they mean another. And then we start trying to solve a symptom, not the actual problem. So I think you just got to remember that, most consumers, probably 99% of the people we deal with are not great communicators. You got to really try and go 2 or 3 layers deep to say, well, Greg, when you say, here's another thing, people go, well, I'm going to get 4 or 5 offers. I like to say, well, I think that's a great idea. I mean, honestly, if you want to get the most money, I would get 10. I mean, this process only takes, I don't know,
An hour.
hour and a half. So for you to spend 15 hours to get, I don't know, sometimes you can get 2-3 grand more for your house. Like, why not spend 15 hours to get an extra 2 grand? And they'll go, oh, I'm not going to do that. And I'll go, so when you say you want to get 5 different offers, how will you choose? And they'll say, well, the best deal. And what do most people think when they hear best deal? The
Most
highest
money.
price. All you have to say is, hey, Greg, when you say best deal, what exactly do you mean?
Oh, I love
And
that.
it might be who can close the quickest. It might be, well, whoever gives me the biggest deposit. Whatever, it doesn't matter what it is. What it is should be the focal point of your compelling offer. Right? Because everybody else just goes, well, I can close in 2 weeks. We're the best. We got better business bureau. Like, whoever runs into a client and goes, yeah, we're the second best buyer in this market. Nobody. They all say the same stuff. So you're not doing anything to separate yourself. Ask that one question. If you're listening to this, every time a seller says something, just say, hey, Greg, when you say that, what exactly do you mean? You'll be surprised how much different it is, right, than what you thought it was in the beginning.
It gets the truth out so fast. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of salespeople, if they're not trained or they don't have experience, they'll take an objection or a smokescreen like that and just take it for what it is. But if you can go that extra layer deep and say, Eric, when you say, the best deal, what do you mean? And they say an answer that you can solve, it gets you closer to the deal without having to worry about that objection they said. Because if their main concern, like you said, is like, oh, I want to make sure the person I'm dealing with is credible, and the best deal to me is working with the person who's most credible. Like you said, you present to them how you're going to be able to solve their problem and be the most credible, and then they're not going to have to get the 3 or 4 other offers,
Yeah. Somebody told me a while ago that price is the main objection when you bring nothing else to the table.
So true. Oh my gosh. So freaking true, man. Oh,
yeah.
I love that. Let me share with you a quick story on this actually happening. As I want to put this, because you shared your fight story, I'll share with you a non-fight story. So this is a good one.
That's enough for a day.
Yeah. So my acquisitions guy, we got a great lead. There was competition as always. This is down in Delaware, and he went on the appointment, and he didn't get the deal on the first go around. And we were talking afterwards, and I'm like, well, what could you have done better? Blah, 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 blah. So he's like, oh, they were getting a bunch of offers, and he wasn't making a decision on the spot. So he didn't want to share the number with them, understandably so. So we kind of brainstormed like a game plan. And I'm like, here's the deal. If you want to get this property, I'm going to tell you exactly what to do to get this deal. I said, look for an excuse to get back into the property. Say, hey, Pete, I forgot to go in the attic. And by the way, this was down the street from where he lives. I said, hey, look for an excuse to get back in the property. Okay. Go do another walkthrough, right? And find a way to get back inside, because the in-person is where the deal is going to happen, not over the phone in this case. So he goes back to, and I said, on your way out the door, say, hey, Pete, I know we were supposed to talk about that pesky price on Thursday. I'm already here right now. Why don't we just see if we can work this thing out? So on his way out the door, he's like, says exactly what I told him to say, sits down on the couch, and they're going over what's most important to you, what's, the main concern. And he was able to sit in the living room and deal with all those objections that he gave him that 2 days before, the day before, the second day. And they worked the whole thing out. What's most important to you? The whole thing, got the whole deal made on the couch when there was apparently other investors coming that same day. They canceled the appointment, signed the contract with him, because he was able to get into the appointment again and really find out the root cause on why he didn't want to sell on the spot. And the reason was, he wanted to make sure the buyer he was working with was going to be able to do what they say they were going to do, the credibility, the best deal possible. You know what I mean? And even though we got the property less than the competition, but that little extra appointment got us a $35,000 deal when the next guy in line was just trying to give him an offer. You know what I mean? And he built the value there. And that's why the seller took the discount, because they knew they were going to be selling to a wholesaler below market value no matter what. But it was just a matter of who they were going to do it to, And he felt the most comfortable with Brett, because Brett sat there and took the time to actually listen to him versus everyone else just ripping offers out over the phone,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's the big thing is I think we have this sort of broken thinking that everybody wants the cheapest price, wants the best price. And if you literally think about like the homes that we buy, the food that we eat, the cars that we drive, the clothes that we wear, how often do we make decisions about buying the cheapest, best deal whenever we make a major purchase? Virtually never, right? And there's a few examples. I have a few friends that like literally that, they shop at the thrift store for their clothing. They just don't care about what it looks like. And somehow they make it work with like a 30-year-old Star Trek t-shirt, right? And then like they drive a 300,000 mile Prius because it gets them from point A to point B, and it's got like mismatched fenders and like starts 30% of the time.
Yeah.
They're a minimalist, but like that's one in a million.
Yeah.
Right. Everybody else buys a car that makes them feel good. They like the way it sounds. Like they buy the house that like makes them feel established and successful, not the 2-bed, 1-bath and put everybody in bunk beds. But we somehow feel that like sellers and buyers are just not human, right? Like they don't operate off the same wavelength that we do when we make decisions. And the reality is that's just not true, right? Like people don't generally care about, like, because if they really wanted the best deal, they would list it in the MLS. 100%. If they really wanted the most money, they would fix it up and sell it. If they really wanted all of this stuff that we assume that they do, they wouldn't even be considered. Like, so a lot of, right, I'm sure you talk, but I'll go, well, why wouldn't you just fix it up and sell it? I mean, that's what I'm going to do, right? And I make lots of money doing stuff like that. Yeah, it's a lot of work and you got to manage contractors and buy materials, but like, heck, if you want to get the most money out of it, why not flip it yourself? And they'll go, and then you know what they're going to tell you? All the stuff that you need to use to close them. I don't have time. Like I tried it before on my grandma's house and I lost 30 grand. And oh, okay. I see. Yeah. Well, that makes sense. I'll keep that in mind as we work through this and I try and figure out the best way that I can help you. Definitely no renovations. Is that what I'm hearing you say, Greg? And they'll go, yeah, I don't want to do any of that crap.
Oh my God. Because they're handling the objection for you by you being proactive about bringing it up, which is, it's funny. I talked to some investors and they're like, well, I don't want to tell the seller to list the house because they might list the house. I'm like, dude, if they were going to list the house to begin with, you want to find out now, right? Versus like,
you don't have near that much. You're giving yourself too much credit if you think you can actually convince. Like I was thinking about this the other day, and if you're familiar with the Northeast and New York and Delaware and PA, we have these big plow trucks when the snow comes, right? And I wish you could see me. I'll give you the example. It's like this big gnarly looking thing that's out of like a sci-fi movie, and it comes down the road, and it's like just, and it's driving down the road, and it's pushing all the snow out of the way. It's like this little trail of salt it leaves behind, right? Yeah. That's how most people sell. Really, what you should be selling like, right, is if you ever saw a little tugboat that brings like these massive cruise ships into port, and it goes out and finds them like right out in the deep end, right? And it's like they're close to shore, but they need guided in. And the tugboat, just as small as it is, just kind of nudges this big old ship into like this tight little parking space and a dock, and it rests nice and neat right there. No dents, no bumps, no nothing. More salespeople need to be tugboats and less plow trucks.
That might be the name of your next book, bro. That's a good title for How to Sell Like a Tugboat by Eric Brewer.
Yeah, be a tugboat, not a plow.
That's so true. Especially too, like I've seen another thing with sales, and that's a great example. Like a lot of investors, they're so afraid to screw the deal up, it prevents them from using the process that is needed in order to get the deal if it's closable, right? Like you had made a great Facebook post, that was like yesterday maybe, about like closable deals. And like, I remember when I first got into like how to sell, and this was a while ago, but like, I thought every appointment I would go on or phone call I would make, I had to close the deal because I learned sales training, right? But when you can get into a situation where if you do everything you have control over and work the system right, and you don't get the deal, you shouldn't feel ashamed about yourself because that was not a person you could help at that time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I know exactly.
Yeah, because it gets demoralizing with salespeople. Like, oh my God, this doesn't work. No one's motivated. Like they make all these assumptions up in their head, and then it screws their psyche up, so they can't.
Oh, it was the wheel. I put up the spokes.
Yes,
on
the spoke wheel. That is exactly. Can you elaborate on that? That was a great post. Yeah, that was great.
I can actually explain it better than I can write it. So I struggled in that post a little bit because I went through some typing fatigue. But my sales manager that's been with me now, Joe Cipollini's been working with me for almost 15 years. He got in a slump 14 years ago. And he was just, he was a lead suck. And people were blah. And I drew that out for him. I was like, look, dude, like, let's represent these are, 100 leads in here, and there's only going to be 10 sales. And sometimes there's like 5 in the first 10 people you talk to, and you feel like you're the greatest gift to sales ever. Sometimes they're nice and spaced out. It's like one little sale every 10 leads. That doesn't happen enough. Sometimes you'll talk to 90 people and the 10 closable transactions are in the last 10. But if you allow yourself to get your mindset messed up, when you get to the closable transactions, you're going to say, I'm not going to waste my time with these people. I'm going to skip right to the offer. Or I built rapport and trust with all these other people and I was still 100 grand away. So I'm just going to start making offers in the beginning. That way I don't waste my time. And now when you actually get to the closable transaction, you don't make a deal when you should, because you modified your process. And then it exaggerates what, the slump that you thought you were in. And now you're in an actual slump because you're not being a good salesperson and following a process and doing the things that you need to do. So it was a really good tool. I explained that to him like 14 years ago. And like 2 years ago, he told me it was the most impactful like sales conversation he's ever had. I was like, how do you not let me know that for 12 years? I didn't think that much about it. And then, so I put it up the other day because there was a guy in the office that was like, man, I went like a week and I made a bunch of offers and I didn't get any deals. And Joe was like, hey man, you need to give him the wheel talk. He needs to hear the spokes on the wheels. But yeah, you got to keep the right attitude. You got to treat every lead like it's a deal until it's not.
That's so good. Yeah. Until proven otherwise. Yeah. Because that way your process will be dialed in so you don't have to, second guess yourself. So listen, man, we could talk for sales about hours. I want to cover one more part on this podcast about how you were able, you've been in business, since 2006, Eric?
Yeah.
So you've been in the business for almost 20 years. You've been able to shift your business model, throughout the years as the market has ebbed and flowed. So just talk about what has that evolution looked like? Because I know you at one time you were doing a lot of flipping and then you did a lot of turnkeys and now you guys are doing a lot of novations. So how have you been able to just adapt with the market? Because a lot of people now, they see the new market and they're like, oh my God, it's so much harder to wholesale or whatever the issue is, rehab. How do you stay on the cutting edge of that? Because that is really what's kept you guys as the dominant force in the South Central PA market.
Yeah, so I think it's a really good question, super relevant right now. And I think in its simplest form, you have to take what the market gives you, right? Like for the last 3 years, wholesaling was
easiest
super lucrative. Yeah, and I said this to somebody the other day, and I was like, literally for 3 years, you just needed a house to be a wholesaler. Now you need a deal.
Yeah.
Right? Like you could sell houses. They weren't even deals, but now you have to have a deal, right? So I talked about this before where I started doing turnkey like 4 or 5 years ago because it got really hard to buy wholesale deals, right? Like everybody talks about how great it was to be able to sell houses the last 3 years, but it got really hard to buy because there was way more competition.
Yeah.
Right. And for the first time that I can ever remember, you could actually list a fixer-upper on the MLS and sell to a retail buyer. People were doing crazy stuff. So I think you have to be aware of what the market will give you. Like right now, what the market's giving us is FHA, VA buyers that need a little bit of seller's help. Obviously have to get an appraisal because FHA and VA both have condition reports associated with that appraisal. And they want to get home inspections. Those buyers right now are paying top dollar. They're out in full force. And I'll tell you why. Those people could not buy a house the last 3 years. They were getting bullied by hedge funds, bullied by conventional buyers. They would have to waive appraisals, which they can't do on an FHA VA loan. So those people couldn't capitalize on 3% interest rates. They couldn't get an offer accepted. When there's 15 offers, I promise you the first one to get crossed out off the list of possible options is an FHA VA buyer that needs 3% seller's help. Yeah. There was a guy just tagged me today who we taught novations to. He signed up December 15th. He's closed 6 novations between December 15th and what's today, January 10th. Yeah. And the HUD he just posted, he said it was his largest profit deal in a while, maybe ever. There was a $340,000 house. He gave up 10 grand seller's help on the HUD. Those deals were like that buyer wasn't getting $10,000 seller's help before, right? Wow. He obviously had it baked into his profit. So, what's the market giving us right now? If you can figure out a way to get your deals, whether you're a wholesaler, whether you do novations, whether you do fix and flip, whether you do wholesale, if you can put your properties in front of FHA, VA buyers, you will get maximum amount of money for your house in the shortest period of time.
100%,
Right?
man.
So that's what the market's giving you right now. And if you can hang in there long enough, all of the circumstances, the high interest rates, increasing unemployment, the recession, all of that stuff that's hurting our buyers right now is also hurting sellers. And it's going to take a period of time before you start to see some of these deals come down the pipeline, like pre-foreclosures are right now are getting much more prominent, right? Well, there was no pre-foreclosure during COVID and the year after because, in crazy states like, California and Pennsylvania, you weren't allowed to foreclose. So there weren't any pre-foreclosures, right?
Now it's catching up. It's
the forbearances are expiring. I bought a house last week. We closed, I don't know, 5 days before. He hadn't made a payment in 2 years, and he had a forbearance agreement that extended almost 2 years, and it was a VA loan. His interest rate was like 2.5%, and we bought it sub 2.
Wow.
Right? Because he didn't have a bunch of equity, but he had a bunch of equity in his rate. So right now, sub 2 creative finance innovations is what the market will give you. And if you're a wholesaler, like those are all just different acquisitions, disposition strategies.
Yeah.
Most wholesalers, you're just a marketing and sales company, more so than a real estate company. Real estate companies own real estate. They hold assets. They remodel. They do construction, right? They property manage.
Yeah.
If you're a wholesaler, you're a sales and marketing company. So if you have to innovate a little bit with your sales and marketing, that's not super risky. And so if you can figure out what the market's giving you and innovate a little bit to capitalize on that opportunity without completely uprooting your business model, that's how you innovate and survive, because 2006, when I got into the market, hyper competitive, right? You had a 500 credit score and a job. Job was optional. You could get a mortgage.
Yeah.
Right? And everybody was flipping houses. 2008, 90% of my competition went out of business. So I had a great opportunity to buy stuff. I was buying HUDs for 30 cents on the dollar. I didn't even have to do direct to sale. You could buy bank-owned properties at wholesale value, but you couldn't sell them to anybody because nobody could get a mortgage, right? And everybody was out of work. And, so by 2012, 13, it started to recover, and slowly, wholesaling became more popular. More people were flipping homes. Around 2015 or 16, it became super competitive again. So I pivoted back to direct to seller, got out of fixing and flipping, started doing some wholesaling. 2017, I started doing turnkey because nobody was competing on turnkey properties. I was buying 3-bedroom row homes in the city that would rent for $1,200 and I could sell for $120. Most flippers weren't fighting over that stuff. They were looking at, the more expensive homes with bigger spreads. So that's what the market was giving me. And I could sell them to turnkey buyers that didn't care about the color of the shutters or the interior design. They were just simply looking at it as an ROI, right? If they were buying on the 1% rule, it's the people that a lot of, like Wall Street Journal called them laptop landlords. That's who I sold all my turnkeys to. Laptop landlords, guys that live in California and Utah and Washington State, where the price of real estate is, say, median price is $600,000. They can't buy income producing properties there. They can buy them in PA and use a good property manager, and they can buy income producing properties here, right? Their $1 million goes a lot further in Pennsylvania than it does in California. And they're all, our turnkey buyers were high income W-2 employees. So, they weren't looking for a side hustle. They wanted something close to passive. So I killed turnkey for 4 or 5 years. Rates went up to 7%, crickets. Because, something that was cash flowing $300 a month at 4%, when it went to 7%, it was negative cash flow. So my turnkey business was brought to a screeching halt. So we've gone heavy novation right now, sub 2, and more fix and flip because I can get more of my deals in front of FHA buyers and VA buyers. So that's what we're doing right now.
No, it's cool to see how you've pivoted like throughout all these cycles over the last almost 20 years. Like the turnkey business, when you have low interest rates in your area, I mean, you're in like York. I'm assuming most of these properties are in like York, PA, these row homes.
Yes,
right?
York and Harrisburg.
Yeah,
like we did really well with row homes, 3-bed, 1.5 bath row homes.
It's funny you say that because we do business a lot in Wilmington. Like we just locked up a house today in Wilmington, Delaware, and it's like the same thing. There's like these row homes. They're pretty cheap. They cash flow pretty well. and you can get them for like nothing, renovate them. And yeah, someone like, in California would be like, oh, that's a great deal, which it is from an
Yeah.
ROI standpoint until the interest rate's 7%, because they're still getting a bank loan, So no, that's awesome, man. So now what do you see happening in the next, obviously no one has a crystal ball here. We'll kind of end the show with this. What do you see the real estate market doing in the next 24 to 36 months, if you had to guess? Obviously, you're in Collective Genius, a lot of smart people in there. Like what are you hearing from people, and what do you think will happen? Because a lot of people now, like, they just don't know what to do. They're like, oh my God, is the market going to get worse? Is it going to get better? Are rates going to go down? Like, what are you kind of looking at with your business? Because you guys got a huge team down in PA.
Yeah. So I think it's very, very market specific. I think what happens in Phoenix, Arizona versus what happens in York, Pennsylvania will look drastically different. So I wouldn't dare try and, predict what's going to happen anywhere other than where I live, because I can see things happening and notice trends, and I see it firsthand. We have a massive, massive shortage of inventory in our market. I pulled up a deal the other day, didn't understand why it wasn't selling wholesale, and the numbers seemed good. So I comped it out to see what reno and ARV would be if we were to keep it. And this particular house is like a 189 house in a good school district up here. And I pulled between 150 and 250 in an entire school district. There were 2 homes available.
Wow.
2. Right now, that's a big 150 to 250. That's $100,000, spread there.
Yeah.
And the median price here is around 250. So like, if you have something that's at the median price and you're one of 3 properties, by the way, the other 2 were not renovated. They were, I don't remember all the details, but they weren't super attractive homes. It's probably why they were even active or available. If my house went on the market at 199 today, it would sell in 5 days. So in our market, FHA, VA buyers are still paying a premium for property. We're not seeing the crazy stuff like, escalation offers way over list price. Although we did a novation the other day, we listed for 209. I don't know, we might have 4 or 5 offers that sold for 230. That was in Millersville, PA. So Lancaster County, Millersville, pretty desirable. It's actually, shockingly, it's the top 5 places to retire in the U.S. Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where all the
Really?
I swear to you. Yeah. Lancaster, PA, top 5 places to retire based on cost of living, restaurants, shopping, healthcare, stuff like that. And then Lidditz, PA, that's in Lancaster, was voted the top #1 coolest small town in the U.S. Wilbur
Really? I'm gonna check this out next time I'm back east.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But so anyway, that's a $200,000 house below the median price, and it sold for $20,000 over list price. And it was a novation. Like, it wasn't renovated. It was a 1,400 square foot townhome with a 1-car garage on a slab. It's not like it was, some mansion or something. It was,
yeah.
just, but like, if you're approved to, around $200,000, there's just nothing to buy. So, for me, I think some people will say that interest rates are going to come down middle of this year, Q2. If those things hit low 5s, I think the market's going to go absolutely berserk again. Because I think what they've done is they've created this pent-up demand, right? That closely emulates what we saw with COVID, right? Like, when they told everybody had to stay in their house for 6 months, what happened when they were allowed out?
Bam! Everyone was buying a house.
Yeah. So it's not like unemployment's crazy. It's not like, so there's plenty of people out there with good credit and money that want to buy homes, and they're just not doing it right now because the interest rate's 6.5%. And maybe they can afford it, but they're like, listen, I'm not going to buy a 250 house. I want a 350 house. And in order for me to get the 350 house at what I can afford, the rates have to come to 5. And I think the other part that'll make it worse than post-COVID is you'll now have FOMO, where like when the rates were in the 3s post-COVID, like, you could think logically it would continue forever. Now that we've seen rates dip and come back up, the people that were paying attention are going to go, man, when they drop to 4.9 or 5 1/8, I better hurry up and buy before they go back up to 7.
And that is a very smart prediction. Not saying you're an economist
Like,
or
nobody was saying that when rates were
Makes sense.
3%, right? Like the media wasn't talking about, like, they talked about how historically low they were, but no one said you better hurry up and do something before they go to 7. And that happened like in a flash,
Yeah.
right? Like it was the fastest raise in interest rates I think we've ever seen, ever in at least 40 or 50 years,
It's
right?
crazy. No, it's accurate. I think that's accurate. I mean, listen, who knows, time will tell, but I think it's a very legitimate prediction. And the truth is you got to just be willing to be adaptive. So Eric, if people want to check you out, what's the best way to follow you online? And then we'll end the show.
Instagram, Eric_Brewer, invest_.
Beautiful. We will put that in the notes.
On
And
Instagram.
Eric_Brewer_.
Yes.
Beautiful. We'll put that in the notes, and we'll talk to you soon, Eric. Have a great rest of your day. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, brother. See you, man. Later.